So, I'm here to talk about optimizing your ketogenic diet for performance, and a lot of us have been doing keto for a while. So what happens when you get past that first or second phase of keto? So that's what I want to talk about today, what I've done in the last 2.5 years to kind of enhance my ketogenic diet. And when I talk about performance, my view of performance is not just athletic performance, it's mental performance, it's all those things. So the first thing I want to do, tell you a little bit about me. As Liza told you, I am a lifelong athlete, football and track, college football, capoeira, CrossFit, powerlifting, Muay Thai, half marathon, obstacle course racing, indoor rowing, and now jiu-jitsu. So if you see me and I look a little bit beat up, it's because I've been doing a lot of jiu-jitsu. I'm a father to 2 beautiful boys, Desmond and Dean. If you guys want to see what we do with our kids, we have a Fat Fueled Kids channel on Instagram and Facebook. And husband to Maura, aka Fat Fueled Mom. Also a podcast host with Mr. Keto Evangelist. And it used to be called The Ketogenic Athlete. Now it's called the Ballistic Health Podcast. And what we do on that podcast is we explore the performance benefits of a ketogenic diet. So that's what I'm looking at. How can keto help everything from pro football athletes to BMX athletes to arm wrestlers, everything you can think of. And I'm also a podcast host with my wife, Fat Fueled Mom. We have Fat Fueled Family, where we talk about how to do keto with the family, fitness with the family. We also talk about a few other subjects that we love, like education with our boys and our parenting style. And I'm a mediocre YouTuber. I just posted a YouTube video that I recorded last April. Terrible editor. I can record stuff, but when it comes to posting it, that's where I'm bad. And I'm a meat aficionado, so I'm known as a very carnivore-ish type of person. I kind of hesitate to say carnivore because if any carnivore police are in the room and they see me, with the occasional avocado or the occasional vegetable, I might get excommunicated, but. All right, so what is keto? So this picture, everything here is keto. So you see this bottom right corner, Ryan talked about Dr. Will Cole, Ketotarian. This is a ketogenic vegetarian dish. We also have bacon wrapped hot dogs. Those are keto. Of course, ribeye. This is something that I'm eating this month where I'm including a few more starchy vegetables like butternut squash that you see here and sweet potatoes, the feared sweet potato. Cabbage and chicken, and then you have this zero carb bread, which is full of wheat, which is technically keto because ketosis is a state, but is it optimal? So now this is where we talk about acceptable versus optimal. And when I talk about that is when you're on this ketogenic journey, there's phases, and I think everybody should be trying to enhance their ketogenic diet over time. So of course there's a Bible verse that says when you were a child, you spoke as a child, but when you grow up, you put away childish things. So I'm breaking this down into 3 phases: starting a ketogenic diet, becoming fat adapted, and optimizing your ketogenic diet. So when you start a ketogenic diet, keeping carbohydrates low is the main thing. You want to keep them below 50 grams a day. A lot of people can't even do more than 20 grams a day. Eating adequate protein, that's where I kind of differ from. They say not eating too much protein. I say eating adequate protein because a lot of my audience is focused on performance. And what happens at the beginning of the ketogenic diet, especially in the first 3 weeks, is if you're not eating adequate protein, you may lose lean body mass. A typical keto person may say, well, no, that's not lean body mass, that's just glycogen. But if you're not eating adequate protein, you're at risk for losing lean body mass as well. Eating adequate fat. As you continue, and you become fat adapted, the first thing you see is improved performance in the gym and physical activities. I noticed that in the first 3 months of a ketogenic diet, I lost my pump. I didn't have my pump anymore, and it was kind of discouraging. But after 3 months, I got my pump back, and everything started to just feel the same. I was the same size. I remember seeing Dr. Jacob Wilson in the gym, and I was telling him, he's like, man, you look great. I was like, well, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do to lose muscle. I'm fasting, I'm doing more cardio, but there's no muscle gone. How is this happening? And of course, we were talking about that right when he was doing the study with standard ketogenic diet, which I don't think Ryan referenced. the standard ketogenic diet versus a cyclic ketogenic diet for bodybuilders, and they put them in a caloric deficit. Oh, actually, you did mention that, yeah. And the ketogenic diet maintained their lean body mass. So another thing that happens is you unlock these new powers. So intermittent fasting and extended fast, that's like a new power that's unlocked. You start to see that, wow, I don't have to eat so frequently. I could fast if I wanted to. And then hopefully you're also looking at improving the quality of your food. So you're maybe saying, well, I'm not gonna drink Diet Cokes anymore, or I'm gonna ditch some of these other packaged foods in favor of real food. Now, optimizing your ketogenic diet, this is where I am now. And of course, we always try to keep in mind, Maura and I, my wife, that not everybody is at the same place as us. So lately, we've been talking about a lot of things that maybe we used to do at the beginning that we're not doing anymore. We used to do all the recipes, all of the, sugar or substitute recipes. We used to do all of those things. But what we found, especially with our children, is because our boys eat a ketogenic diet, mostly ketogenic, sometimes paleo, but if I were to test my boys, I would probably guess that they're in ketosis like all the time, because even on a high day, they may be eating 60 grams of carbs. Whereas the difference is that when we started them, they were eating lots of Lily's chocolate bars, they were eating a ton of erythritol, it was destroying their guts, and they couldn't regulate themselves the way they regulate themselves now with just some fruit. So these are the 4 aspects that I want to focus on today. Prioritizing animal protein, I think that's the most important thing. I think a lot of people, what happens when they do a ketogenic diet, whether they have a disease state or not that they're trying to manage, a lot of the time they may not be eating enough protein. You start to see things like people are losing hair, their energy levels are down, their micronutrient status is not good. The other thing that I'll talk about is ditching the non-caloric sweeteners, and this is a little bit of a controversial topic because it's hard to just lump them all together in one, but I'm going to do that anyways and I'll explain why. Keeping it simple when we talk about food variety and food choices and how they affect the way we eat throughout the day. So if you're overly varied in your food selection, you may find that you're hungrier, and I'll explain a little bit why that happens. And of course, engaging in self-experimentation, which is what I always do. I'm terminally curious. I always want to learn more. And a lot of the time, it kind of gets me in trouble because I'm doing things that people say, well, you shouldn't be recommending that. Well, I'm not. I'm just experimenting on myself. And that's what I encourage everybody to do, is do self-experimentation to see, if you can make this a more sustainable diet, if you can improve some health conditions that may not have been improved at first. You may have gut issues. You may have issues with dairy. So I always encourage that. So prioritizing animal protein. This is where we start. This is where I think in my house, we always say we start with protein. So every plate, and when I say protein, it's animal protein. It's not protein shakes or powders. We prioritize animal protein. And I think that inadequate animal protein poses a greater risk to performance and body composition than too much protein. Of course, Ryan talked about gluconeogenesis, and gluconeogenesis from protein is extremely difficult, is extremely energy intensive, and it's only going to happen if it's needed. Higher protein equals more macronutrients and better absorption. You may have seen this before where we're comparing 100 grams, which is right around 4 ounces of different things from blueberry, kale, beef to beef liver. And I want to give you guys just your first free gift, which is how to get your family to eat liver, which I have done successfully with my boys. So I'll take like 2 pounds of ground beef, and then I'll add a pound of ground liver, a pound of ground heart, and about 12 ounces of bacon. Mix that all up into burgers, and you guys can see on my Instagram, my boys are tearing it up. So we're getting all these really good micronutrients. We're also, I think, leveraging somehow, I'm not sure how this happens, but the nutrient density, I really do think, impacts my satiety. So I can eat 2 pounds of muscle meat easily, but if I eat 12 ounces of liver, I'm much more full. Maybe it's because I don't like it that much too. Maybe I'm just getting turned off. But so that's one of the things about protein. Now the other thing that you can look at is how to determine what is best for you. I'm going to go over my heroes in the ketogenic space, which is, the first book that I read that really impacted me as a person who's interested in performance is The Art and Science of Low Carb Performance by Dr. Philippe Volek. That is, of course, until Ryan and Jacob came out with their book, which became my new favorite book, The Ketogenic Bible. But if you look at what they're recommending, this is from a paper in 2004. Dr. Finney wrote 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram of body weight. And then in the book, 0.6 to 1.0 grams per pound of lean body mass. So we're going to take me, for example, a 220-pound male with about 10% body fat, and you'll see in the first example, 120 to 170 grams of protein a day, keeping in mind that 120 is the lowest that you can go without sacrificing lean body mass, from what he wrote. And in the other example, 198 pounds of lean body mass is 119 to 198, which is comparable in both cases. I have been known to consume much more protein in a day. I'm not saying that you guys should, but I can eat 300 grams of protein in a day if I'm eating lamb and it's lean and have no issues. And then keeping in mind the things that I think are important in this is your metabolic history, your insulin sensitivity, your lean body mass, and your activity level. So Dr. Ben Bickman had an amazing talk at Low Carb Breckenridge, I think a few years ago, talking about protein on low carb diets and the role of glucagon and insulin and why protein may not be an issue. But he did have a caveat at the end of that, which was make sure that your blood sugar is regulated and that your insulin is in check. So if you do have hyperinsulinemia or if you do have uncontrolled blood sugar, maybe too much protein is an issue. But if you're already to that point where you're getting close to your target body weight and you want to improve performance and you want to see if adding protein helps, then I would say go for it. All right, so the most controversial one is ditching the non-caloric sweeteners, because I know that a lot of people love their sweeteners. They're still having it in their coffees. I will say that as in shape as I am and my history and all the things that I've done, I have serious issues with binging, and I'll be the first to admit that. I've been talking about this for years. It was like a 6-month period last year where I finally had to say enough is enough, because I've been sharing my story and I've grown my platform, and with that comes a ton of companies who are trying to send me stuff and they want me to try it and they want me to talk about it. And I have companies that send me things that are so delicious that I can't stop eating them. I won't mention one company, but they sent me 6 boxes of 4 chocolate bars per box. And they had MCT oil and they had all this good stuff in them, but I could eat 4 of those chocolate bars. I could eat a whole box of the chocolate bars. And everybody pays when that happens because the gas is terrible and it's really bad. Yeah. And it was interesting to see, because with my boys, we were trying these things with the boys too. And every time we gave it to them, it's like they didn't want to eat food. They were always going for the snacks. They don't want to eat the real food. They don't want to eat the meat. And I think that's a big problem. And I'm saying that in our situation, it's interesting to see that they've been able to regulate themselves much better if I give them half an apple, or if I give them, or if we're doing a recipe that calls for something sweet, maybe we put a robust maple syrup or a raw unfiltered honey, which may add 1 to 2 grams of sugar per serving, which I know sugar's bad, we all agree with that, but it's not as sweet a lot of the times, and it has nutrition, and it doesn't disrupt their guts, and they're able to just regulate themselves much better. So if you're stuck and you're having issues, the sweeteners is, I think, one of the first places that you can look to improve this. So and I want to just be clear that when I reference a study, this is not to put an end to the discussion. These are just some studies that support what I'm saying, and I'm fully aware that there may also be other studies that are saying different things, but I'm just saying that in certain cases, the things that I'm talking about have been found to be true in the literature. So this was one that was done in Appetite 2014, Hill et al., the effect of non-caloric sweeteners on cognition, choice, and post-consumption satisfaction, which basically talks about all things considered equal on an ad libitum diet. If you're consuming sweeteners regularly, you may eat more. So your energy balance is thrown off and you're eating more. And we all understand here, I think in this audience, that calories are not the end all be all. It's a lot more with hormones, but if you're overly consuming calories all the time because of the sweetener, that may be an issue. All right, this is one that was really interesting to me, and again, there are lots of studies looking at this. Most of them that I've seen deal with sucralose. So sucralose is the main offender, and you'll see sucralose in usually large food companies. They'll use sucralose to sweeten things. Sugar-free syrups, we used to do the keto pancakes all the time with the boys, and any sugar-free syrup is going to be sweetened with sucralose. But what you see sometimes is that some of these sweeteners can, in fact, impact your gut microbiome in a negative way. So in this study, what they did was they looked at a 6-month experiment where they had the acceptable daily intake, which is just a typical intake that someone would have of sucralose, and it actually showed that there were pro-inflammatory genes and disruption in the fecal metabolites, which basically they had much more of these fecal metabolites in the people that were consuming the sucralose. And so we all know that a lot starts in the gut, you know, your immune system. All those things are super important, and if you're having issues, and I'll tell you another example, when there's inflammation, you're not burning as much fat. And a perfect example of that is my wife, who took the food sensitivity panel, the MRT food sensitivity panel, and it was amazing to see how some of the foods that we consider health foods, that may be health foods, but impact certain people's guts depending on their genetics, their epigenetics, that can cause inflammation in these people. And one example was turkey. I was out of town, and my wife was eating turkey as our friend who's an RD called her and told her that these are your most sensitive foods. And she was eating turkey as it happened, and turkey was one of them, and she had a headache the whole week, you know. And so it's really interesting to see. I think food sensitivity panels and genetic testing are something that we should all be doing a lot more of. Not to determine an action plan, especially with the genetics, because if the genetics are a certain way and you're living a good lifestyle, these genes may not be expressing themselves. But if you do find yourself in a place where you feel like you have less energy or any type of other issues, then maybe it is important to know that you have MTHFR or other mutations that can, you know, affect your vitamin B status and things like that. And when my wife is eating everything that's not on her list, she feels great. And when she does eat those things, not only does her weight loss stall if she's on a diet, but she feels worse. They all manifest themselves in different ways. Some are headache, some are lack of energy, some are even depression-like symptoms. So that's why it's super important to look at gut health and look at inflammation, and some of these sweeteners can be driving that inflammation. And so for that reason, that's just another reason why we don't want to have the sweeteners. Now, this one is another pretty controversial one because there are studies that show that there is no insulin release with a lot of these sweeteners, but this does happen in some cases. If you look at the bottom example, there's something called the cephalic phase insulin response, which is basically sometimes, I think Ryan talked about someone walking by a donut and gaining weight. Well, that may be, who knows if that's actually true, that may be that cephalic phase response where your body's releasing insulin in anticipation of something sweet coming. This was one that was done in 2014 in Nature, and it was by Suez et al. Artificial sweeteners induce glucose intolerance by altering the gut microbiota, which was kind of interesting to see because initially there wasn't much many issues as far as blood sugar. So you didn't see a big blood sugar rise, but over time it seemed like the changes that were happening in the gut were driving more blood sugar dysregulation, higher insulin, or at least the insulin wasn't coming down the way we wanted it to, the way they wanted it to. And then there is, of course, the significant increase. This was one study that just looked at sucrose and saccharin. Saccharin is, a very popular, one of the oldest non-caloric sweeteners, and it showed that there was an activation of the cephalic phase insulin response after tasting these things. So just another thing to consider. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is keeping it simple, and it's been really interesting to see, like, again, all of these wars that are happening in diet. You're seeing them all over the place. Some people play nice, some people don't play nice. And one thing that's interesting is I loved to see there was a discussion between Dr. Sean Baker and Lane Norton on, I think, Mark Bell's podcast, where they talked about carnivore versus your typical if it fits your macros, carb cycling. Very hard to listen to Lane, very hard to deal with him in general because of his negativity and everything. But one thing that they both agreed on is that maybe some of these diets are working for similar reasons. And maybe we should be looking at what are the common things that are happening in different diets that work. And maybe we should just celebrate that, and maybe we should focus on that. It doesn't happen. A lot of time people use science to tear down science. It's just unfortunate. But one of the things that I thought was interesting was the lack of variety in a lot of diets that are successful. So food variety and palatability may stimulate appetite, delay satiety, and promote excessive energy intake. And so this was a review that was done in 2014 by Johnson and Wardle. Variety, palatability, and obesity in Advances in Nutrition. And they basically looked at the fact that when you increase the variety of foods that you intake, a high variety versus a low variety diet results in higher palatability ratings, greater intake of the test foods, and higher documented whereby repeated presentation of the same foods over several meals or days results in sharply declining palatability ratings. And I think it's really funny because I was at the Metabolic Health Summit, and Matt and Mega from Keto Connect had just had me on their podcast again, and I was talking with Matt, and Mega didn't let me live down the fact that the other day I took 100% chocolate bar, and I served myself half the bar, and I served myself like almost a quarter cup of almond butter, and I ended up scooping the almond butter back in the bottle, and she's like, "That's absurd, you're no longer relatable to me." And it's because the almond butter that I got was the Maranatha, no salt, no sugar added. And it doesn't taste as good, And so because it doesn't taste as good and the palatability wasn't there, I was able to put it back. And the funny thing about it is that we came to the conclusion is that if you really want to succeed, your food can't taste too good. It's got to be it's got to be okay. It's got to be doable. And it's like, this is fair, this is good. And I know that that's no way for all of us to live. I know that even for me, who I say that I eat for performance, there are going to be a lot of the times, pretty much every day, the food that I eat, I'm really excited about it. I enjoy it. It's delicious, but you have to just be honest with yourself and see the things that you're eating, see how they affect you psychologically. I know that there are people with issues in the keto community where all these physical things are happening to their bodies and to their hormones, but they still are dealing with psychological issues. And we shouldn't say that this is the ketogenic diet's fault. We should address those other issues that may not be part of the diet, but they're definitely impacting the way we eat. So I just think, this is probably one really good explanation why the carnivore diet works so well, for instance, because there's that lack of variety. I would argue, though, that it's still delicious eating steak every single day. That never gets old to me. So here's another one that, again, it's really hard because I deal with, I have an audience that I know is, a lot of my audience is the athletic crowd who doesn't have a poor metabolic history, who's been doing very well, who wants to know, how do I add keto, how do I add muscle on keto, and who's asking me all these questions. But then again, I also have a lot of people who are still dealing with a lot of metabolic issues who may not be in the same place. And you know, a lot of the conversations I've had, especially recently with what I'm doing this month, where I'm having paleo days, 3 days a week, where I'm eating 100 to 150 grams of carbs, which, by the way, for me is still a ketogenic diet, because I have not been out of ketosis this whole time, which is pretty mind-blowing. And they're saying, you're going to confuse people. People are going to see sweet potatoes on your plate. People are going to see these things on your plate, and you know, it's not responsible or something like that. And I still think that people shouldn't be trusting others with their decisions. They should be looking at their own individual situation, their own body, their own health, and that's what I want to do. I want to just get people to think about these things and think about things you may not have thought of before. It's a harder job to do, because you got to navigate through all these things where it's not as simple as just saying 70% fat, 25% protein, and 5% carbs. But I think that's what we all should be doing. This is the whole purpose of this talk, is to look at this journey and how you can do totally fine eating the same way the rest of your life. But if you're like me and you're curious, no matter what happens, you're going to learn something. And that's what I think is, if it fails because you gain some weight while doing it, or if it fails for another reason, I honestly still think that's a worthy experiment, because you learn something about yourself. And so why do we engage in self-experimentation? One of the reasons is, of course, to learn more about our bodies, to fix ongoing health issues. Some people go on a ketogenic diet and they still have gut issues, and their gut issues were not resolved. You look at someone like Mikhaila Peterson, who was on a ketogenic diet, and she only experienced the autoimmune improvements until she removed all plant foods. She's doing a really cool experiment right now where she's giving herself the gut bacteria from healthy people to see if that helps her tolerate other things. That's amazing. Let's see how that works. But in general, I think it's really cool to see that there is no one-size-fits-all keto, and the more I do keto, the more versions of keto I see. And again, not arguing that one version is better than the other. And you'll see at the end, when we really get to the point of this, is knowing yourself and being honest with yourself. Not being like, okay, Danny's eating sweet potatoes, and so because Danny's eating sweet potatoes, I'm going to make myself sweet potatoes because I love sweet potatoes. Well, sure. I mean, who doesn't love sweet potatoes? But what is the purpose of it? And so the next thing is, of course, improve performance. And maybe you don't improve performance. You know, for instance, for me, what I'm seeing this month is, interestingly enough, there's not big changes in anything, which I guess the main key lesson about that is that I can eat some carbs if I want to every now and then, and my cognitive performance is not going to decline. I do see definitely it drives cravings a little bit more. So if you do have issues with cravings, adding some carbs to your diet is only going to make it worse. But definitely a worthy take home for me is that I can do these days. Like my wife, another example is self-experimentation, is my wife does carb ups. So she'll do on day 19 of her cycle, a few days after ovulation, she never eats any carbs. So for her, 50 carbs a day is a major carb up, because my wife is pretty much a carnivore by necessity. Because of her food sensitivities, because of all her issues, she does the best when she eats carnivore. And then, but the problem was that her cycle got down to 25 days. And that makes it hard on everybody. I mean, everybody. 2 weeks out of the month, we're out of commission in every sense. And so that's not good. But interestingly enough, you know, she heard some of the things that our friend Ali Miller was saying on her Naturally Nourished podcast about carbing up for hormonal reasons. So she does, like I said, day 19 of her cycle, and then day 1 and 2 of her cycle. Literally the first month she did that, her cycle was already up to 27, 28 days. And it's been 4 or 5 months now, and sometimes she forgets to carb up. Sometimes she forgets it, and it's interesting that the next month her cycle is shorter again. There could be progesterone issues, there could be issues that we've had a progesterone test at home since August of last year. And if you all don't know, our son was run over by a car last August, so that was a little bit of traumatic experience. He's perfect, by the way. He's you know, it's a miracle. But she wasn't going to take the progesterone test after that happened. And then in January, she decided to yank her Mirena out herself in the bathroom, her IUD. And so we were like, okay, well, we can't test that yet. So that could be an issue. But it is interesting to see that adding those little bit of carbs for every month for her has really worked. And so in light of this current experiment that I'm doing, that just tells me that when she carbs up, I'm going to carb up. I'm going to have some carbs too. So it's just, again, going back to sustainability, which is definitely a big part of this diet. All right, so how do you do self-experimentation? This is the way I do it, so this is the way I'm going to recommend it, is you always start with your purpose. You know, if you remember the scientific method, you want to start with your purpose and work backwards. You want to establish your timeline and main endpoints. You may have things that come up that you didn't have as a main endpoint, but the good news is that you don't have to defend this to anybody, and you don't have to say these are the weaknesses of my study. This is just for your own thing. You may have some really cool benefits that you didn't think about when you started it, and that will be very helpful. For me, I usually like to do things for a month, and then of course you establish how you'll track progress, you summarize your key learnings, and then most importantly, you develop a plan in light of these findings. I see people so often trying things out, and then they don't really apply it. So it's just constantly experimenting for the sake of experimenting. I don't think that's helpful. You see some objective and some subjective measures, all the objective measures that you see here. Some of these subjective measures like mental focus and sleep quality are actually objective as well. And I've done things like intermittent fasting, extended fasting, exogenous ketones, all these different things, carnivore. So here are the key takeaways. Number one, know thyself. That's, you know, what I talked about. Know your situation, be honest with yourself. Why are you trying this? What is your motivation? Do you have a bias at the beginning of the study? Because I'd love to see any research looking at people's perception of food before they start eating and how it affects the way their body handles it. I'm not sure if it's even possible, but I do think that it's possible that if we perceive food to be good or bad for us, it could affect the way our bodies handle it. Never stop learning. Always be, like I said, always be a white belt. That's kind of how I see my life. I'm always wanting to learn. And when you know better, do better.